So, when you sent over that Surrounded by Idiots piece, it, really resonated with me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it took me back to my first job. There were some colleagues I just, clicked with instantly. We
Yeah.
were on the same wavelength,
Hmm.
practically finishing each other's sentences.
Right.
But then there were others, it felt like we were, I don't know, speaking different languages. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
I try to explain something that seems super obvious to me, but they just stare blankly, like totally bewildered.
Yeah.
It was so bizarre. I could never figure out why it was so easy with some and such a struggle with others. And that's like the heart of what we're diving into today.
Absolutely. And it's like a universal experience, right?
Yeah,
That feeling of, why can't they just get it? Erikson's book, Surrounded by Idiots, gives us a framework to actually understand these differences instead of just getting frustrated.
exactly.
It's based on the DISC method, which was developed by Bill and David Bonstetter over at TTI Success Insights.
And the origin story of DISC is pretty interesting. It's not just some abstract theory.
Yeah.
It came from a very practical question. Could agricultural salespeople sell more just by observing a farmer's behavior?
Interesting.
And that question sparked this fascinating partnership between father and son. Bill, the father, sounds like a real people person.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what Erikson might call a red-yellow personality. And his son David, a red-blue with a computer science background. They teamed up to create something pretty groundbreaking.
Totally. So imagine, back in the early 80s, they're developing software to analyze human behavior.
Wow.
Not just guessing, but looking for patterns in how people approach tasks, how they interact, all that.
Really interesting.
And David Bonstetter himself has said the point of this whole thing was to help people understand these different styles so they don't feel like they're, well, surrounded by idiots.
Right.
It's about recognizing that different doesn't mean wrong.
And that's so important for everyone listening, right?
Right.
This isn't about labeling people or judging them.
No, not at all.
Erikson, drawing on DIC, talked about 4 main behavior types, and he uses colors to represent them.
Okay.
We'll get to those colors in a second, but the key takeaway is that each of these styles has its own strengths and weaknesses. They're just different sets of tools.
Right.
Our goal today is to understand those tools so we can communicate more effectively with each other.
So should we start with the red behavior type then?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so picture this. You meet someone who's bold, ambitious, driven. They always seem to be striving, competing, wanting to achieve and win.
Okay.
That's likely a red personality. They're historically associated with what's called the choleric temperament.
Okay, yeah.
And what's interesting about reds is that they're usually pretty easy to spot. They don't hide their drive or their desire for results.
That's so true. And the book has some great examples of this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's this story about a CEO who just had to win at everything.
Wow.
And I mean everything. It wasn't just about business. This guy would brag about reading 100 pages an hour.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, turned reading into a competition. He even got so competitive playing memory games with his kids that his wife had to ban him from playing.
Oh, my
It
God.
was that intense.
Wow, that really illustrates that drive to be the best, huh? And it goes beyond games, too, right?
Yeah, totally.
Reds often have, zero patience for what they see as inefficiency or slowness. Erikson talks about this same CEO who'd just interrupt meetings that were dragging on.
Oh, yeah.
Even if they were discussing big investments, he'd be like, come on, people, we've been talking for 20 minutes. Let's make a decision. It's just a few million, not rocket science.
Yeah, that sense of urgency, right? Like
Yeah.
time is money.
Exactly. And there's this other story about Bjorn. He called Erikson early on in his new job.
Okay.
It was a really quick, almost abrupt call. And Erikson was kind of left feeling confused, like, what was that about?
Yeah.
Later on, they talked about it. And Bjorn, who's a red, he barely even remembered the call. For him, it was just a quick check-in. And since Erikson wasn't available right then, he didn't see the need to chat or make small talk. Time is precious.
Right.
What's interesting is that Bjorn was known for getting so much done. Like, he'd maximize every little bit of time.
That's impressive.
Yeah, really efficient.
But sometimes that focus on speed can mean that details get overlooked.
Right.
Like, they might not double-check everything or fact-check in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, there's a story about Elizabeth, a consultant.
Oh, yeah.
She was in a meeting with this experienced team, and she confidently presented some financial figures, but they were way off, like millions off.
Seriously.
Yeah, and no one even questioned her at the time. It wasn't until later that they realized the mistake.
Oh, no.
It shows how a red's confidence can sometimes, overshadow the need for careful checking.
That's a good point.
Hmm.
And Erikson talks about how other people perceive this red behavior, especially when the red person isn't around.
Oh, interesting.
Because of their intensity, people might be hesitant to criticize them directly. So behind their back, you might hear words like belligerent, arrogant, controlling, even dictatorial.
Wow.
Strong words. But it shows that there can be a big gap between how reds see themselves and how others see them.
Right. A difference in perception.
Exactly. And even their communication style can contribute to this. They tend to use a lot of I statements like, I think we should do this, or I need that report now,
Yeah.
which can come off as very strong, maybe even aggressive, to people who are more focused on relationships and harmony, like the Greens we'll talk about later.
Absolutely. It's all about different approaches to communication.
Erikson also has this example of how reds delegate tasks. He talks about a middle manager who was a mix of red and blue.
Okay.
So she would delegate tasks, but then if things weren't moving fast enough for her, she'd just jump in and take over,
Oh, wow.
even before the deadline.
Yeah.
So you have that red need for speed combined with the blue focus on getting things done right. But it often led to her criticizing people for being too slow.
So if you're dealing with someone who's predominantly red, what's the best way to communicate with them?
Well, the key is to be direct and respect their time. Skip the small talk and get straight to the point.
Okay.
What's the bottom line? What's the key takeaway?
Right.
And be prepared. Have your facts ready, have all the background information, because if they sense you're not prepared, they will grill you.
Yeah, they will.
But here's the interesting thing. If you can build trust quickly and show them how your idea benefits them directly, reds can actually be quite easy to persuade.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. But it's also important for reds to be aware of like the downsides.
Absolutely.
That constant urgency can lead to them leaving others behind, which can create tension and hurt teamwork in the long run.
Yeah, for sure.
Reds need to understand that spending time on things that might seem less task-oriented, like checking in with their team, building relationships, that stuff is actually important.
It's all about balance, right?
Exactly.
And when there's conflict, reds tend to, get angry. For them, it's just another way of communicating. Like, they're emphasizing their point.
Okay.
But they might not realize that their intensity can come across as, bullying or aggressive, which obviously leads to more communication problems.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about reds, all about action and results.
Yes.
Now, let's switch gears and talk about yellows.
Okay.
Yellows are all about connection and enthusiasm. Think about people who are outgoing, persuasive, always optimistic, curious.
Yeah.
They light up the room. They're really good at building relationships.
They make it look effortless.
Right, totally natural. And Erikson points out that they're rarely shy. They see strangers as potential friends.
Yeah.
They have this very positive initial perception of people.
And they're so easygoing. It's almost contagious.
Yeah, it's true.
Erikson talks about his sister, Marita, as a classic yellow.
Okay.
He says he's never heard anyone say a bad word about her. She just connects with everyone. Even when it's pouring rain, she'll find something positive to say.
Oh, wow.
Her laughter is it's infectious. You can't help but smile when you're around her.
That's amazing. And that optimism, it's pretty remarkable.
It is.
Erikson tells a story about his friend Mike, who had just bought this really old car.
Okay.
And almost immediately, he got into a little fender bender.
Oh, no.
So Erikson calls him, all worried, and Mike's response, no problem, I just got out the other door.
Oh, wow.
Classic yellow. Right. Focus on the solution, not the problem.
Always looking on the bright side.
Exactly. And they can be incredibly inspiring, especially as leaders.
Yeah, totally.
Erikson talks about Marianne, a sales director he knows. She was incredibly successful, and her colleagues all said it was because of her amazing ability to motivate and inspire her team. She could even win over difficult customers with her positivity. Like, she'd turn a complaint into laughter,
That's a real talent.
Yeah, it is. And that inspiring quality often goes hand in hand with creativity.
Oh, interesting.
Erikson has a friend, Robin, who thinks in images, always trying new things, and he just verbalizes his ideas as they come to him.
Like a stream of consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. It's like his brain and his mouth are directly connected.
But Erikson also points out that yellows can sometimes dominate conversations,
Okay, yeah.
And they might not always be super accurate with the details in their stories. There might be a little embellishment, a little exaggeration.
Right.
It's part of their charm, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. And their communication style, well, they do tend to talk a lot. Sometimes you have to gently interrupt them to get a word in edgewise.
Yeah, I can see that.
They also don't like rigid structures or systems.
Okay,
They hate feeling constrained.
makes sense.
This can lead to them being, well, maybe a bit careless with details, like they might miss appointments or not finish tasks.
So how do you effectively communicate with a yellow?
Well, Erikson suggests starting with the big picture.
Okay.
Don't get bogged down in details right away. Focus on the fact that things work, the positive outcomes, not the nitty-gritty of how they work. And be prepared to match their energy. They get excited about new things.
Right.
It's also key to be open and friendly. They really value that personal connection.
Makes sense. But even though they're big picture thinkers, you still need to have a clear plan.
Oh, absolutely. Know what you want to achieve
Okay.
and try to get concrete answers from them.
Right.
It's also helpful to be really clear about appointments, deadlines, all that.
Gentle reminders, maybe?
Exactly, because some of the downsides of yellow behavior, well, they can talk more than they listen, and their sense of time can be, let's say, flexible.
A bit optimistic, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they do have big egos. They like attention.
Okay. So what about criticism? How do they handle that?
Well, they can take it pretty personally, get upset easily, but they also tend to have selective memories.
Oh, interesting.
They forget the negative stuff quickly. They bounce back to that positive outlook.
So we've covered the action-oriented red and the enthusiastic yellow. What's next?
Let's move on to greens.
Okay.
These are the people who are often described as thoughtful, considerate, always putting others first.
Yeah.
They really value stability and harmony. They want everyone to be happy.
That sounds lovely.
It is. And the core of the green profile is this desire for peace and well-being. Erikson talks about his colleague, Maja.
Okay.
She was always going above and beyond, remembering birthdays, offering support to stressed out colleagues.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, she got a real sense of fulfillment from taking care of others, even if it meant putting her own needs second.
It's that genuine kindness, that desire to help.
Exactly. And there's this story about Christopher, who called Erikson on a Sunday. Erikson was renovating a house at the time and having some trouble with the boiler.
Oh, no.
Christopher gave him all this advice, even knew a plumber he could recommend.
That's helpful.
But his offer to actually come over and help was really indirect, almost hesitant.
Really?
Yeah, it illustrates that green desire to be helpful without being pushy.
So they're very sensitive to how their actions might be perceived.
Exactly. And that gentle approach can be surprisingly effective, even in tough situations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Erikson tells a story about Helena, a green salesperson.
Okay.
She managed to connect with this really difficult executive, someone no one else could sell to.
Wow.
And she did it by finding common ground, talking about their shared interest in vintage cars.
So it's all about building that personal connection.
Absolutely. But Erikson also points out that this green behavior can sometimes lead to, well, negative perceptions.
How so?
People might see them as passive, resistant to change, or hard to get a straight answer from.
Okay, yeah.
Because they're always trying to please everyone and avoid conflict.
Right.
It can be frustrating for people who communicate more directly.
It can lead to misunderstandings, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And their communication style, well, it tends to be indirect
Okay.
and sometimes ambiguous. They're trying to avoid taking a firm stance.
Right.
They like routines, predictability, change makes them uncomfortable.
So if you're dealing with a green, how should you approach them?
Patience is key. Be gentle. When you're talking about sensitive topics or changes, give specific examples.
Okay.
And really acknowledge their feelings, how they might be affected. Give them time to process everything.
Rush them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's also helpful to frame changes in terms of how they benefit everyone and how they'll maintain stability in the long run.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And avoid putting them on the spot or pressuring them to decide quickly.
Because that just makes them uncomfortable.
Exactly.
And because greens hate conflict, they might not always speak their minds.
Yeah, they might go along with things even if they disagree.
So they're not being dishonest, they're just trying to keep the peace.
Right. And that can be a problem because important issues might not get addressed.
And their resistance to change, even when it's for the best, can be a real obstacle.
Yeah, it can.
So what happens when a green is actually faced with conflict?
Well, they'll usually try to avoid it completely.
Oh, wow.
They'd rather withdraw or find a compromise that keeps everyone happy, even if it doesn't really solve the problem.
Okay, so that's greens. On to the last color, blue.
All right, blues. These are the people who value accuracy, logic, and well-reasoned arguments.
Okay.
They're detail-oriented, analytical, and tend to be more introverted.
Interesting.
They need a lot of information before they make a decision. They want to be sure they're right.
That makes sense.
So, facts and logic are super important to Blues. Erikson tells this story about a friend of his at a restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
They were just chatting, and his friend starts meticulously correcting him on all these random facts. Like how many Super Bowls the Patriots had won, where Will Smith grew up, even the stats on Super Bowl coin tosses.
Wow. That's specific.
Yeah, and he was totally calm, matter of fact about it. Classic Blue, right? Accuracy is everything.
It's fascinating how their minds work.
It is. And that need for detail, it can show up in every part of their lives.
Okay.
Remember the CEO Erikson describes, who worked in the packaging industry?
Yeah.
His emails were super detailed and kind of dry.
Right.
His meetings were timed to the minute. And he just needed tons of information before he'd make even a small decision.
Wow.
Erikson had to write up like a massive amount of material just to satisfy his need for information about a leadership program.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was. But for the CEO, it wasn't about stalling. It was about thoroughly understanding every single detail.
So it's not about being difficult. It's about being thorough.
Exactly.
That methodical approach, that's classic Blue.
It is. And that meticulousness also extends to honesty and doing things by the book. Erikson talks about this guy who was selling his house, and he was really uncomfortable not disclosing even minor flaws, even though it might mean a lower selling price.
Really?
Yeah, because for Blues, integrity and accuracy are super important.
They have strong principle.
They do, and they're very systematic in how they approach tasks. Imagine a Blue assembling IKEA furniture.
Okay.
They'd read those instructions carefully, check every part against the diagrams. Every step would be methodical, making sure everything is just right. They might even count the screws, just to be sure.
That's attention to detail.
It is.
Yeah.
And Erikson's story about his father calculating the exact volume of gravel needed for his driveway just by looking at it,
Wow.
and then spending hours making sure it was laid at the precise angle specified in some manual.
No way.
Oh, yeah, down to the centimeter.
That's amazing.
That's Blue dedication to precision, following rules to a T. And for Blues, rules and instructions are logical. They make sense.
Right.
Erikson's father would stop at a red light in the middle of the night, even if there were no other cars around.
Because that's the rule.
Exactly. So how do people typically see Blues?
Well, Erikson says they can come across as overly focused on details.
Okay.
They might seem slow to make decisions because they need so much information. And some people might see them as distrustful because they have to verify everything themselves.
Interesting.
And because they're often quiet, they might be seen as aloof or uninterested.
Right, so their silence can be misinterpreted.
Exactly. And they communicate very precisely. They love written communication because it allows for clarity and detail.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they like to think things through before they speak. So for a Blue, silence in a conversation is actually a good thing.
Oh, interesting.
It means they're processing information.
Right.
But they can also be quite critical if they see inaccuracies or illogical thinking.
So what's the best way to communicate with the Blue?
Be prepared. Have your facts, your figures, your logical arguments.
Okay.
Skip the emotional appeals, stick to the data, provide written documentation, and give them time to think things through.
Don't rush them.
Exactly. Respect their need for thoroughness, and be meticulous in your own work.
But Blues also need to be aware of the potential downsides of their style.
Yeah, what are those?
Well, that need for complete information can sometimes lead to what's called analysis paralysis.
Okay.
They get so caught up in gathering data that they can't make a decision.
Oh,
They can also be super critical of any perceived sloppiness or a lack of attention to detail, and they might struggle with spontaneity.
right, because they like to have a plan.
Exactly. So what about conflict? How do they deal with disagreement?
They probably don't express it openly or emotionally.
You're right.
They might just ignore information that contradicts their own understanding, based on the facts they've gathered.
Yeah, interesting. So there we have it. The 4 color-coded behavior types.
The action-oriented red, the relationship-focused yellow, the stability-seeking green, and the detail-oriented blue. It's amazing how these different styles play out in our daily interactions.
It is. And understanding these patterns can really explain why some conversations are so easy, while others feel like you're talking to a brick wall.
Absolutely. It takes the mystery out of those frustrating interactions.
And remember, most people are a blend of these styles. We're not just one color.
Right.
Usually 1 or 2 are more dominant. But understanding those combinations, how different colors interact, can make a huge difference in our relationships, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, totally. Like a detail-oriented blue and a big picture yellow could be a great team if they understand and appreciate each other's strengths.
Exactly.
So it all comes back to self-awareness, right?
Mhm.
Taking a look at our own behavior patterns, how we might be perceived by others.
Yeah.
Am I coming across as too intense, like a red? Am I overwhelming people with my yellow enthusiasm? It's about recognizing those tendencies.
Absolutely. And it's not about changing who you are. It's about being adaptable, learning to communicate more effectively with people who have different styles.
Right, because we can't always be in the majority.
Exactly. We need to make an effort to bridge those gaps.
So I encourage everyone listening to try and see the people around them through this framework.
Yeah.
Think about it. How could this understanding, even in a small way, change a relationship or a communication challenge you're facing? Maybe those people who seemed like idiots before are just operating with a different style.
It's a different way of seeing things.
It is. And that shift in perspective can make all the difference in building better, less frustrating relationships.